Welcome to another episode of Code for Thought. For people working in data science, Scikit-learn, the Python machine learning library, probably needs little introduction. Used by millions, it's one of the most popular machine learning toolkits out there. It is open source, has a very active community of developers contributing to the code, and also a very diverse community where users and contributors could be either individual developers, students, researchers, or engineers at large companies and organizations. Scikit-learn is used in commercial environments as well as in fundamental research. So, how does an open source project of this size and with this reach handle all of that? And how did it get to that point? To find out, I had the pleasure of meeting some of the team members that help and keep Scikit-learn running. Meet Adrien Jalali, Gaël Varocco, Guillaume Lemaitre, and Lucy Liu. They are spread over different countries and indeed continents, and they all had their own interesting journey to become part of the Scikit-learn community. A testimony to what one of them said during the interview: software is people. But let's hear from them directly in the following conversation. Hello everybody, thank you very much for your time. It's the Scikit-learn team. And before we start talking about Scikit-learn, maybe we can have a round of introduction. I'm doing this in alphabetic order. Maybe we can start with you, Adrien, first.
Sure. Hello, thanks for having me. I'm Adrien. I grew up in Iran, then moved to Vancouver in Canada, then moved to Germany, studied computer science and then bioinformatics, worked in machine learning and cancer diagnostics, then moved to the industry, left the bio side, and after a while ended up in open source. And now I live in Berlin.
Gaël, you're next.
Hi, I'm Gaël. So I grew up in France and a bit in the US and a few other places. I studied physics and eventually decided computers were more fun. And I was interested in open source really early on. And these days I do research in computer science.
Brilliant, thank you. Guillaume.
Hi, I'm Guillaume from France originally. I'm still working in France. I move a bit for studies a bit everywhere in like Western Europe, let's say. And I have a PhD in medical imaging. And when I did some machine learning there, then I ended up somehow working on Scikit-learn, and now I'm kind of working full time there.
And finally, Lucy, you're in Australia.
Yes. Hello, I'm Lucy. I grew up in New Zealand. I also have a background in bioinformatics, and I also worked at a cancer research institute. Yeah, and then I moved to France to work alongside the Scikit-learn team at RIA, and now I work at Kontakt Labs, contributing to open source.
So Scikit-learn, I'm sure that many listeners will know what it is, but could you quickly describe what it does? And then we can talk about how it all started.
Okay, I can start because I helped launching the idea. Our original goal was to do somewhat of a textbook implementation of textbook algorithms for Scikit-learn. And this has evolved. And I think our current mission is to help people do valid machine learning and data science as easily as possible. So it's a software package that tries to make your life easier if you're doing machine learning.
Anybody wants to add anything?
Yeah, I can add something, which is it's open source, meaning that you don't pay something, and is how basically I use it the first time. Because I was a PhD student, I had MATLAB, I didn't have money, and the lab as well, and at some point I couldn't run my experiments. So I had to switch to something that was available freely and that I could run actually. So that's machine learning for free, let's say.
It is also important to note that it's not deep learning. It is statistical machine learning. And all of the generative AI deep learning stuff is out of scope from what we do.
I think that's quite an important caveat, isn't it? Because when people hear machine learning, they might associate that with deep learning.
Some people might, but most people, when they do machine learning, they do statistical machine learning. Mm-hmm. It doesn't have the hype, but it definitely is used a lot more than deep learning in production in companies where machine learning is actually used.
Maybe we can start with how you all got involved, because I think that's quite an interesting story in its own right, isn't it? Because you all had different routes to Scikit-learn.
Yeah, I think newest to the project. When I moved to France and INRIA in 2019, and worked alongside the Scikit-learn group in Paris, is when I started contributing to Scikit-learn.
All right, so you were a committer basically initially before you started joining.
I actually worked in R and bioinformatics beforehand. I guess I was interested in machine learning and kind of, I guess, more general applications because bioinformatics is quite niche. But mostly when I moved to work alongside, I guess, in Paris in RIA was the job. But I've kind of continued contributing after I left France and through several jobs.
Well, I was also doing R back in 2011, 2012. Somehow I switched to Python, and then I was doing a little bit of statistics and then a little bit of machine learning. That's when I kind of got into machine learning. And then I did some machine learning using R, back then the Carrot package. And then when I switched to Scikit-learn, I was like, it's not like everything works out of the box. I have to know things, which was refreshing for me. And then a few years later, in 2017, 18, it was, I think, 2018. This is after my PhD. I was a consultant. I had quite a bit of time to do other things, and I wanted to do open source. I went to a conference, and this is a conference that we organized, PyData Berlin, and back then we spontaneously decided to do a session on my first open source contribution. We went to give a talk, and in the talk we talked about how easy it can be to do open source. And I presented my punctuation changes and grammatical changes to Elasticsearch's documentation, because as I was reading the documentation, I would just fix them to kind of present that hey, you can do open source, it's easy. And then somehow after the talk, when I went back, I was very motivated to do serious open source. I went online not knowing much about open source. I was like, okay, what do I use? Back then I was using a little bit of TensorFlow. So I went on TensorFlow. I was like, okay, can I work on this? Nobody would respond. I would open a pull request. Nobody would respond. I'm like, okay, this doesn't work. What else do I use? I use Scikit-learn. I went on Scikit-learn. I found it a documentation issue. Very easy, adding tiny examples to the documentation. I started doing that. And then people started to respond. And there were specifically two people who were responding to me back then who I think of my mentors. Unfortunately, none of them are very active on the project now, but I felt very welcomed and I stayed around, and it made me work more and more on Scikit-learn. And then about 6 months later, one day in December, I woke up to an email asking if I want to be a core developer. And I was like, oh, hell yeah. And I had not seen any of the members of the team. I had no idea how they look like. It just happened that they were organizing a sprint in Paris in February, just 2 months, 3 months after that. And that's when I went there and met everybody in person.
Thanks very much, Adrian. Guillaume.
On my side, I think, so during the PhD, so I mentioned I was doing some MATLAB things, and then I switched. So basically the first thing that I was the users. And I had a problem when doing the PhD with something that is linked to imbalance learning. And basically, I kind of write libraries around that, and I wanted to have it compatible with Scikit-learn. So this is I already contributed somehow to open source before to start with Scikit-learn. And then because I use download from Scikit-learn whatsoever, I say, hey, why not trying to do stuff there? Then I do a couple of PR there where I got scared with one of the core contributors, which was Alex Grandfort at that time in the process, because he was asking me things that I have no idea what they were, API and stuff like that. And I remember the first thing I did was to send an email to Alex. And now when I think about it, it doesn't make any sense. People doesn't expect, I wouldn't expect him to answer to me nowadays. And actually he answered to me saying, yeah, you cannot learn that from books. So I say, okay, so I have to contribute more to learn then. And a bit afterwards, what happened is I saw one day that Gael was speaking in Paris in a symposium or something like this. I said, oh, that would be cool to go there because it's inside my research topics. By going there and discussing whatsoever, then I asked, okay, and do you have any position working on open source? Which on Friday was no, and on Monday say, hey, by the way, we have that thing there. It could be cool if you think about it. And then like the next month I was in Paris. So that's how it started, really. And I had full time to work on Scikit-learn then.
Thank you. And finally, Gael.
So maybe I think it's interesting to indeed start where I started in open source. I remember the first thing I tried to do in open source was to contribute to a visualization tool called GNUplot. I wanted to contribute 3D plotting to GNUplot, and this was a standard C library which you built with .config, makefiles, and everything. And I didn't know version control back then, so I had to learn version control. I got better at C, and I wrote a huge pull request, which never got merged because, hey, it was too complicated. And I never finished it. And then time goes on, and I'm doing other things. I'm working in MATLAB on my PhD, and I don't like MATLAB. We were basically stealing licenses because there weren't enough for everybody in the group, and that was wrong. And Python was quite new back. Well, not new, but the use of Python in science was quite new. And so I start, working more and more in Python. And then two things happen. First, I identify something that's called IPython that's really cool, really useful. And then second, I also find a 3D plotting library that I like a lot. And so to cut a long story short, I end up going on a conference in the US, and I know that the main person behind IPython is close to where the conference is. So the person being Fernando Perez, and I sent him an email, and he's like, oh, why don't you just come over, sleep at my place, and we can just talk and code. And so I do exactly this. I come over, I sleep at his place, and we talk and code. And then I'm hooked. I'm like, yeah, I can do that. And also one thing he says, he tells me, you can do it. Just go ahead, talk to people, contribute. You can do it. And so, yeah, I'm hooked. I can do it. And just, I get better and better at this. And I get involved in different projects. I do some failed open source projects. And so, then a few years later, I'm now doing data processing at INRIA. And I'm like, we need machine learning. We need machine learning. It's a basic tool. And I'm not convinced that any of the tools I see in Python are sufficient and well done. So then what we do is with a few colleagues, we decide, well, we're just going to, invest energy in a new package. And technically what we do is that we take an existing one that was buried inside a library, inside SciPy, and we take it out. The reason is we didn't want to add an extra package to an already busy list of dead packages, to be honest. Back then it was Scikit-learn, Scikit-learn, because there were multiple Scikits, and this was inside SciPy and yada yada. And yeah, this is pretty much how the modern adventure starts.
I forgot a critical part. One of the reasons I kind of got the job at INRIA was that I met Gail's sister in Australia at a scientific Python workshop. And Gail's sister is actually also a core contributor to Scikit-learn. She's not so active now, but yeah, I had to move to France, the classic two-body problem in academia. And she asked, do you want to work in open source in Python? And yeah, I did, because I'd previously only worked on my own projects by myself. It would have been nicer to solve problems in a team rather than by yourself. So wanted to add that. And Alex was also one of the first, I guess, scary people that I met who interviewed me and wasn't confident that I can jump from kind of R to Python, but I managed to overcome that hurdle and impress him enough in the interview that he hired me.
It seems that INRIA, which is a French organization, and maybe somebody can explain to the listener what that is, but INRIA plays an important role in this because it was kind of the catalyst, or how does this come about?
So INRIA is the French National Computer Science and Applied Math Research Institute. It's got multiple campuses, and I'm a researcher there. Yeah, INRIA was important throughout Scikit-learn because, first I want to stress that Scikit-learn is, not made by INRIA, nor is INRIA the majority of the contributors to Scikit-learn. Mm-hmm. It's more that having an institutional backing helps in the long term to get the backbone of the people, because an open source project, the software is people. And so if you can make sure that a small number of people have enough dedicated time to a project, it helps structure the project. Mm-hmm. And that's absolutely crucial. It's doing the central work that helps all the others organize.
Yeah, and I think this is exactly what I wanted to talk about in more detail now, which is the open source organization. The organization, how do you organize an open source project so that it works? Because code line like Scikit-learn, I don't know how many thousands or tens of thousands of lines that there now is and how many packages. But it needs to be maintained. It needs some work. There needs to be people who look after it. And at the same time, you have contributors, but you can't really rely on them contributing on a regular basis because some of them may contribute once, others may contribute a little bit more often. So how is this whole structure working and being kept together?
I would say we're just lucky that there are enough people who are interested enough to keep contributing. For the most part, we consider almost everybody, even the maintainers, as volunteers, even though a lot of them might be employed and their job is to do mostly Scikit-learn, but that is not the vibe. At least from my own perspective, the reason that I stayed was that it was a nice community. And I have interacted with a lot of other open source communities, and that vibe is what makes people stay. The same way that people don't leave companies, they leave their boss. As in, when people don't have a good personal experience, they don't stay. If they do have a good personal experience, they do stay. But that is a very different question than the governance. Scikit-learn is maintained because there are enough people who are interested in certain parts of it, and each maintainer or non-maintainer is interested in different aspects of it, and they focus on those parts. And we try to help the other people in what they are interested in, because you need at least 3 people interested in something to get that thing in the package. One person who's implementing it and 2 people who are reviewing that thing. So you kind of, for any project, you need some allies. And this is an interesting social dynamic that people try to be like, hey, like I review that thing that you wrote, you review that thing that I wrote. That's what I feel.
Lucy, you've been a core developer.
I think I'm still not a core developer. I have commit rights.
You're part of one of the core groups, Lucy.
Yes, I'm the documentation group, so I have merge rights that I don't use very often.
So I was just about to ask how the experience was for you to actually join. So we heard from Adrian that his experience was very positive when he joined Scikit-learn because it was a welcoming community. And I was just wondering what the experience was for you.
I was, I guess, coddled into it because I worked alongside Guillaume. Guillaume sat next to me while I made my first pull request. It was to, I guess, a dependency of Scikit-learn that I now maintain. And that was a gentle introduction to, I guess, open source, a smaller project. Yeah, I had access to Guillaume, who I asked a lot of questions of, and also, I guess, the rest of the team at Maria. So that was, a nice, gentle interaction. I saw these people in real life, so that helps as well. One of the reasons why I've continued contributing. But yeah, it was also a nice experience, a nice community.
Guillaume.
I would say the first thing that maybe when you look at from outside how this is organized, it just looks like chaos. But it's a kind of organized chaos because it's just like you don't know how this thing works. Like suddenly you have somebody from nowhere that start to tell you what to do, and then you say, "Oh, that's weird. I mean, who is this person?" And then there's another one. But if you stay long enough, you understand that who is interesting on what, and actually it is much more organized than what you would have thought first. And usually these very interesting things because, like Adrien said, we are very open to like outside contributions. So sometimes people come with more knowledge than what actually the core developer can have because we don't master all the machine learning parts. If we would master morally, we would have already implemented. So sometimes we have people that comes and we need to, the people from the project itself, and this is where this is hard. You have to find out if this piece of algorithm whatsoever, or like what is proposed, is relevant to the software itself. And as a core team, somehow it's like you give the direction where the package can go. And if you come with new things, then you have as well to learn on the way what is the right things, what are the trick of this specific piece and stuff like that. So for me, this is really like the thing that I really like about contributing to Scikit-learn is that every day you learn new things, even if it's not going in Scikit-learn, because you have discussion and you see the limitation and you can see as well, like, does it make sense and is it useful for everyone? This is a very tricky one to address, but usually if you have really like a good social interaction with people, I mean, this is really the best for everyone.
Gael.
Well, maybe quickly, as I mentioned before, software is people. The others mentioned that it works because there's several one of us. There are many of us. And so what's crucial to me is to have many people are interested in the package. And I also believe many people from a different background that sit in different bubbles. And the reason is that this diversity of opinion will make better software. So to me, for a software like Scikit-learn, what's really important is that we keep being able to interest and onboard and grow people who do not sit in our bubble. And it's not easy because we've become huge, and I'm not sure anybody has a clear picture of everything that's happening in the development dynamics. It's really hard. And as Guillaume was mentioning, you come in and it's chaos, it's overwhelming. And it's overwhelming for everybody. I think all of us, we look at the list of pull requests and of issues and we're like, oh God. But if you're new, you don't know this and you think, oh, these people understand what's going on. I don't. And so it's about establishing this contact with people whom you don't know and conveying, this kind of organized chaos that creates this common object. And so the challenge is to keep this technical and social structure that enables us to share the work and the code.
Scikit-learn starts with a few people. We heard Lucy was sitting next to you, and your sister was there, and there was Guillaume and Adrien and other people initially. But now it's this big community. And how does this change the governing structure? So what I'm interested in is finding out, how did your governance evolve with the size? Were there hiccups on the way?
I can talk about the foundation. So I was very worried, and I still am, that I didn't want too much bureaucratic process because open source for many of us was supposed to be fun. And if you put bureaucratic process in, it stops being fun. So I wanted things to be spontaneous. So there was this challenge of having people that work together, but without too much top-down interactions, especially since I don't think that top-down interactions are very legitimate in such an environment. So indeed, it started with a small number of people, especially also a small number of people mostly in the same place, but it grew quite quickly. And there was a very important moment in 2011 where we organized an international sprint, and many people came whom I had never met in real life. And we worked together, and we worked together really well. It was really an exciting moment. So, of course, the dynamics and the governance evolved, and maybe I'll let someone else describe this. But the one thing I want to add is that there's the written governance, but there's something that's, I think, more important than the written governance is the social norms. This is absolutely crucial. It can't be identified easily by written statement, but it's present in the project.
So what are the social norms? The spoken ones and the unspoken ones?
Two things I wanted to mention, also related to the previous discussion that we had. In terms of development of the team, I feel like there was a change at some point where a lot more money came into open source in general, and a part of that trickled down to Scikit-learn. There was a time where Scikit-learn did not have a release for 18 months. And now we do a release pretty much every 6 months. And between these 6 months, we do a bunch of minor releases to do bug fixes and maintenance releases and all of that. And a part of that was because universities and governments and companies started donating and putting more money there, which meant not only in RIA, but also Andy in Columbia University in New York, he could work on Scikit-learn. Then he hired two fantastic people who were working on Scikit-learn. There was Joel in Australia who was also at the university working on Scikit-learn. We had Hanmin in Beijing, if I'm not mistaken, during his PhD, he was doing Scikit-learn. And all of that was okay because all of these entities were okay with people doing open source. With me, the same. Immediately after I became a core developer, I was hired by Anaconda to work 100% on Scikit-learn. And that changed also the dynamics because we were seen as volunteers, but we were available 100% of our time or a good amount of our time to work on this project. And when you look at the development, for example, when I started, our issue numbers and pull request numbers were in the order of 10,000 or so. And then now we are at 27,000. It hasn't been growing linearly. if we didn't have these many people dedicated to the project, we wouldn't be able to maintain the number of requests, the number of issues that people open, the number of pull requests that people open. And then in terms of the governance, with having so many people and so much activity, there was also a great need for having a more formalized governance. And that also happened around the time that I joined. I remember immediately after I became a core developer, they told me, hey, Adrian, there's also this governance document that we're working on. They were like, what do you think about it? And me having had I've been active politically in political organizations, and I love writing governance models and policy manuals and
Right.
bylaws and stuff. Like, oh, yes, I like this. So I started contributing there, and we had an initial governance. And since then, it's been evolving. It started with a core developer team and a technical committee team, which by design didn't have much power because the technical committee team is a much smaller team, a subset of the core developer team. And we made sure that as long as the core developer team has consensus, the technical committee team doesn't come in play at all. And in the past couple of years, the only time that technical committee team had to do an official vote was a very unimportant one where it really didn't matter, which I'm personally very proud of because the core developer team has been working. It's like that part is working. And at some point, we realized this is not open enough. We need to open the ground for people because becoming a core developer was such a huge barrier. Like it wasn't easy to become a core developer. So we added the concept of being in the core team. You're a core contributor. You don't have to be a core developer. Now we have the documentation team, we have the communications team, and we have the developer experience team, that they do different things in the community. Like from my perspective, this is how our governance has been evolving.
I would add a little bit to Adrian in that I think there's certainly been discussion that we rename the technical committee the steering committee, because as the project gets bigger, there's been need for not just code contributions, but a lot more kind of diverse other types of contributions, just like documentation and communication, and that these people should also be recognized. And I think that hasn't happened yet, but we're moving towards that.
This is exactly what Lucy said, I mean, on my feeling. So what I would strive for is to open more and more and having more and more people on board. I mean, the things which probably we fear as a core team is to onboard people too early, and then you lose basically the perspective of what the project want to do. But actually, this is probably more fear than actually it might never happen. And somehow we need to find a good trade-off, saying we can just like welcome people much earlier in dedicated team on what they really like to participate on. And by being within the contributor team, then people will be able to get the big pictures anyway. If I have to say where I want the governance to go is to be include faster people on board on different very type of jobs. Scikit-learn is not only like somebody coding some machine learning in his Sunday afternoon at home when it's raining, but more like communicating, making sprint, going teaching, and all those type of material that could be useful to the community as well, like in, let's say, machine learning in general.
Now, I think that's the challenge, isn't it? How you provide the glue. Gael mentioned that you can't write things down in terms of the social interaction because, I mean, that depends clearly on the people. But yet you need to provide some kind of social glue of how the community comes together. You can hope that it will happen by itself and by people being nice to each other, but how does it actually work in practice? You mentioned already there's a community team, there's a documentation team, and others. But what other steps do you think an open source project of this size has to do?
Just to react of what Jesus said, that being nice is not enough, and I would say that might not be. In the way that being socially and responding and nicely and ensuring that everything is in these manners make that people when people write actually they try to go within that directions. And if it's not the case and that people start to misbehave at the time that you can have like a code of conduct things, but this we never use it. I mean, like only one times over like a million times because something went wrong, but just because it happened. But somehow it's because if the community keep our standard, I have the impression that somehow it just stick there. At least this is my feeling.
I think there is more than like, yes, you could call it being nice, but we mentor people. When we are nice, it means that we keep answering to their questions. For example, in Berlin, if I have somebody who's interested, I've been doing it for a couple of years. I would meet them once a week in person and we just co-work together, which would enable them to ask questions easily. Just I'm sitting the other side of the table and they can ask something. And that has brought people to the project. It doesn't always work long term. Like I have had people where they would come like for a couple of months and then they vanish. And I've also had people who they come and they stick around and now they're in the project. And I wanted to mention something about the code of conduct. Like something that we do well is we block unintended type of interaction on our repo very quickly. We react very fast. And I have gotten feedback from people that I'm glad you did that because it makes it a safer space for them. And that happens, I want to say, about once a month. Somebody on our issue tracker says something, we're like, that is not okay. If they change their tone, that's cool. Sometimes we outright just block the person from the org. We have a very low tolerance for being impolite or being very aggressive, and we don't want to have a tech bro culture kind of thing.
I mean, in terms of Glue, well, I'd say Scikit-learn prides itself on accuracy. And I think that can in itself be a good kind of motivation for people to contribute to this project and stay, because it's a useful project. So from another aspect, not just kind of being nice in the Glue, it's a useful project to a lot of people. And that is, I think, maybe a good motivation for people to contribute and stay.
Geil.
Well, in terms of social norms, so I think, many very important things were said. I relate very much to what Adrian said in terms of down-regulating bad interactions. It's something I've learned before doing Scikit-learn. Little actions to down-regulate non-positive interactions are very important. And the second thing is it's, of course, leading by example. And in this regard, sometimes we fail. You get this situation where someone, for instance, is being overly aggressive to me in a discussion, and I can't take it, and so I fail. And something I've learned is that I need to move away from the keyboard in such a setting. Move away from the keyboard, and maybe someone will do something, because everybody gets emotional, and it's normal. In general, I think we learn and we teach, but we teach by example, to accept the humanity in all of us and to accept that humanity means that we have emotions and that we can focus on the positive ones. Once again, I really think it's by example. I remember meeting for the first time, for instance, Joel, who lives in Australia, so we don't get to meet him often. But just meeting such a pleasant person. And I think that's really important for the project. I think to me, there's a lot of setting examples with a lot of positive actions, just basically doing the right thing and a tiny amount of negative control.
What I'm hearing is that you set the culture right from the beginning, the culture that you want to see in an organization like this. And then once you've established that, then maybe it's easier to keep it going in a positive sense.
Yeah, maybe on this side, earlier I thought, when we discuss onboarding someone, ramping someone up, giving a person responsibilities, feedback, there's often, maybe always in the discussion, there's often a comment on how the person interacts. And, if we find that somebody interacts really well, it really helps bringing this person up. To me, the way I think about it is it's about accepting other people's point of view and not trying to push your point of view without back and forth, which is something that we've all, at least I've had to learn. But I think it makes a better project.
I want to move on to how to become a core developer. So we've seen a number of you now talking about how you got core developers, but Scikit-learn has now grown and there's a large number of contributors anyway. But if anybody is interested in becoming a core developer, what would you recommend they do? What is the pathway?
Well, one thing we've done, as I mentioned before, is that you become a core contributor. You don't have to be a core developer to have push rights to the project. It is much easier than becoming a maintainer. We also renamed the core developer group to the maintainer group. And we also gave voting rights to all the other core groups. So, in terms of the governance, at least on paper, you are equal. I do understand that, like, with the social dynamics and like what we do on the project, it is not necessarily like that. We have to work on that. But it is much easier to become a member of the contributor experience team. And that team has been growing, and a bunch of those people have been very active. And it helps them to contribute more. And then if they contribute more and they stick around and like they're in the project, they can like also like become a member of the documentation team, or at some point also become one of the maintainers. But that is also a lot of dedication because it requires a lot of time that not everybody has. And that's very understandable. In terms of what to do, stick around, really. Like, it is a very steep learning curve. I joined Scikit-learn after maybe 20 years of programming, and I felt like I'm a newbie in programming and everything. There's a lot that you learn when you join such a project. Just don't be scared and stay there.
Lucy?
Yeah, I'll echo what Adrian said. I would add work on an area that you're interested in. It's a huge code base. You don't have to take on everything. If there is a particular area that you're interested in, get to know that part. There will be a lot of issues. There'll be a lot of pull requests around that. And yeah, focus on that. And another thing I would say is if you're starting out, stored pull requests are a great way to contribute. Potentially someone's kind of already made a start, core contributors, reviewers have already kind of suggested changes to be made. So it's a great way to get a contribution, take over a pull request that has been abandoned and push it forward.
Guillaume?
Maybe to end that part, something that was not mentioned before, and somehow it is linked to things that Lucy mentioned or Adrian mentioned. In some way, we had the chance that somebody took our hand on the project and like brought us and grow with us on the contributions. So we had that chance. So by sticking around is what you are getting, because you are on the opposite side of the keyboard, is not in-person interactions. Then this is a bit more difficult. At least I see several people trying inside the project to have in-person type of workshop by organizing sprints in different countries. So, for instance, I already went to Berlin to work with Adrian, where they organize Pi sprints. We do the same in Paris. I went to Switzerland in the week where some people, local communities start to organize that. And I'm sure that actually exists all around the world. And going to a hiking night is just like a good start to find people that actually wants to do the same. And then if you have already like a small group of people doing the same, then it's easier to get in or to have like a kind of a motivation locally. And then you will be on the other side of the keyboard to answer to those people. And I see this with Coding Spring, but I also saw sometimes a couple of students, because of the course that they have, then you see that they are like sticking there because they wanted to do an open source contributions. And then they start to like it, and there were 2 or 3 people doing this, and then, oh, that's fun, and then like they stick around. You can be at the PhD level or a master level, but somehow it's like to have, let's say, local interaction with people that have the same, let's say, endeavor than you. It's super cool. And then because it's on a global platform, that will just make you contribute again.
The final question that I have now is, because I think we're running out of time, but the final question is, how do you see the future of Scikit-learn? How do you think it's going to evolve? Okay, there's the package, there's the technical evolution, but there's also Scikit-learn as the community.
Okay, I can start, and I can start by describing something that we've been trying to do since the last 2 years. I've been trying to muster bigger forces around Scikit-learn, bigger financial forces. And it's not only about Scikit-learn. So I think Scikit-learn is doing quite well. I think it's a healthy community, a healthy code base. Sure, it can be improved, but the point is more of the broader ecosystem. We want Scikit-learn to connect to things that help you put models in production, that helps you do better quality assurance on your model, and all these things. And for this, it would help having more hands on the deck and more structured organization. So what we're trying to do is to get funding to have a full-blown ecosystem where Scikit-learn is only part of the game, and that full-blown ecosystem that addresses things like the needs of large organizations and enterprise. And I like to pitch this as do to Scikit-learn what Red Hat did to Linux. The Linux kernel is amazing. I love it, but you need things around it.
Yes.
And I hope this will help, continue this positive dynamic, this positive circle where we have power users who become developers, and the whole thing that makes that the Scikit-learn package is a healthy community and a healthy code base.
One thing I'm very excited about is to enable a broader community to create a lot more around the project, not necessarily in the project. There is already a lot happening, but we know there are a lot of issues, and we are working on them for those people to create things that are Scikit-learn compatible, or they are built on top of Scikit-learn. It is not necessarily easy, but what I would like to see is an ecosystem coming up, with Scikit-learn being only one piece of it. And the ecosystem should be built around and above Scikit-learn.
Lucy, what do you expect from Scikit-learn in future?
I have a small thing to add. I would love to see us attract, I guess, and value more diverse contributions. So, for example, we don't have a lot of people who are good at like the front end and UX. Like our documentation could be improved in that respect. And yeah, it would be great if we could attract more diverse contributions.
Guillaume.
I will double up on Lucy points. That's very, very important, because right now we are good coder doing bad looking documentations. So the documentation is written good, but UX wise, we have too much work and we should improve that. If anybody wants to do UX things, you are welcome to come in Scikit-learn. We don't need to have only machine learning expert. Yeah, in terms of future for Scikit-learn, I really like the idea as well that it's not only Scikit-learn, it's from like the data preparation, where the data come from, up to like you want to put into production if we want to be very useful for people. And somehow maybe a second challenge is to still make people think that the project is relevant in machine learning, because right now we have other stuff like generative AI and whatsoever, and people will think, that's old stuff. And actually, this is probably, from what I'm speaking with people in industry, at the time of today, this is 95% of the use cases. This is useful to do something that are impactful. Generative AI is probably like very, very interesting. To play around. I'm playing around. I want to learn about it. But then when you think about like what can we do today that is actually impactful and to any type of users and with a reasonable cost and whatsoever, this is very a challenge. I assume here is we have to scream saying that Scikit-learn is still not a dead cause, and maybe that will be a challenge as well for the futures as well, to still show that it's not dead, and that will be super useful.
I think this is an entirely different theme that we haven't touched on today, because there is quite a lot of pressure now that happened with generative AI, etc. Maybe we have a different conversation about it in the future. But for now, I would like to thank you so much for your time from around the world. And I wish you all the best for the future.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
I'm sure that Scikit-learn will remain an important and relevant tool for machine learning and data science for years to come. But, as the team pointed out, it depends on the community. And the community, well, that could be you. So if you like to get involved, check out their GitHub repository and webpage and get in touch. Oh, time's up. See you next time. But before I forget, this podcast is covered by the Creative Commons license. See ya.